And we're back on Shardlight Radio, and today I am going to talk about the spirits that are available in the game. A couple things before I get into that. It is true that each spirit can be evaluated not only on the basis of what it does within a game, but also on the basis of the card pool that it allows you to splash into your deck. The 5 spirits that we currently have all allow you to splash in 8 cards, and I'm not going to touch on the differences between the various colors and the power of the cards that you could splash into those 8 slots. So for the purposes of this show, I'm just going to be evaluating the spirits against each other and leaving the card pool considerations to another day. That stuff is relevant, it's just not what I'm going to talk about today. So to get started, I want to talk about Kite. This is the air spirit. This would allow you to splash 8 green cards into your deck, and its power is once per turn, during your turn, discard 1 card to return target air unit you control to its owner's hand, and if you do, switch one of your exhausted shards to active. He also has a Soul Burst power, which allows you to return a unit with cost 3 or less to its owner's hand. Both of these powers are relevant, particularly the first one. The ability to refresh and have more shards available to pay for effects is extremely good, and you can do this during your turn. So you can use 3 shards to pay for something and then drop a 1-drop on top of it. So it essentially has a very small amount of ramp built into this card. Now, returning a card to your hand, particularly a unit that you recruited this turn, is a steep cost. There are situations where bouncing a card from the table to your hand would not be worth it to get the extra shard active, but Air being the faction that has cards that have effects that trigger off of bouncing to your hand, this isn't always even going to be a drawback. Sometimes putting a unit back into your hand is actually what you want to do to begin with, and this is just an extra bonus of getting a 1-turn ramp effect to be able to play something. There's really no downside to this card. His Soul Burst ability is not something you would necessarily want to use early in the game because of how good the spirit power is on Kite. Turning him face down just to bounce 1 card, that's not awesome. Now, that could absolutely win the game. If you can get a character with Guardian off the board and be able to swing at a tower, Kite's second power could absolutely allow you in for the finishing blow on your opponent. This is an extremely solid spirit, probably the best one currently in the game. Next up, Fizzy, the water spirit. Again, 8 blue cards are allowed to be in your deck by the inclusion of this spirit. Once per turn, during your turn, shard drain 1 to draw a card. Shard drain causes you to have kind of the opposite effect of Kite, where you take one of the shards that is in play and you put it on the bottom of your deck. Early in the game, that's a big deal. Later in the game, if I have 10 shards and I shard drain 1, I get my 10th shard back. Start next turn, not a huge deal. Turn 2, going down a shard and essentially being down a resource for the rest of the game is a very steep cost to draw a card. His Soul Burst ability lets you draw another card. So Fizzy has 2 different powers, both of which generate card advantage. Within the color blue, having extra cards in your hand make a lot of sense. There's a lot of solid control type spells that you have access to in water, and therefore this spirit really plays well with the strengths of what his faction is trying to do. I'm a huge fan of drawing cards, and the ability to draw an extra card every turn of the game is very attractive to me. Now, the cost, if you're drawing an extra card every turn of the game, is huge. You're never going to develop shards, so you wouldn't actually use Fizzy every single turn, but sometimes that's all you need. Sometimes 1 more card is the difference between winning and losing a game. So him having the power to essentially let you draw 2 cards in 1 turn once, and then once you Soul Burst him, he's gone for the rest of the game. But that's still big. That's really big. So functionally, turn 5, say, I could draw my natural draw, shard drain to draw another card, and then Soul Burst to draw another card. That's a big burst of card advantage, and realistically, there are board states from which that would allow you to totally dominate and gain control. Fizzy is another spirit that I think is very, very good. Moving on to the Dark Spirit, Luna. When you destroy a tower or unit in battle, place a counter on this card. Okay, There's already two problems with this. Previous two spirits we talked about have their level 1 ability just latent all the time. Kite, you can bounce somebody. Fizzy, you can draw a card. Luna has to charge up a power, and it is charged up by you successfully attacking in battle. So there is such a thing of game states where you end up not charging up your spirit hardly at all because you're on the back foot the whole game. But what do you get if you successfully get charges on Luna? During your turn, you may remove 3 counters from this card, and your opponent discards 1 card. Wow. Luna strikes me as a win more card. You have to be successfully destroying opposing towers and units, which means you're winning the game, to be able to force your opponent to pitch a card from hand, which would generate some card advantage for you. So you have to be winning in order to win a little bit more. That's not great. The Soul Burst ability on this card causes your opponent to discard another card. So conceivably, on turn, say 3 or 4, you could use Luna to make your opponent pitch 2 cards from hand, and deeper in the game, 2 cards from hand is a big deal. So this isn't a terrible card, but it's certainly not on the same level as Fizzy or Kite. It takes more to get the value out of Luna, and the value that you get, well, arguably, you're not even generating value for yourself. You're generating an advantage over your opponent. So this card both functionally works in a different way than the previous 2 spirits, in that it disrupts your opponent as opposed to generating an advantage for yourself, and he requires a running start, or she, I guess I don't know the gender of Luna the cat, but it requires a running start in order to be able to get that value out of it. That's significantly worse than a card like Fizzy, which lets you just straight up draw extra cards. Next, we'll talk about the fire spirit, Corona. Once per turn, during your turn, you can discard a fire unit from your hand to deal 500 to target unit. Okay, now we're back on track with a power that's always available. Now the cost for this is fairly significant. Throwing away a unit from your hand and it has to specifically be a fire unit, which means if your champion is not also fire, you've only got 8 potential cards out of your minimum 40 that you could even get this effect on. So whether Corona is good or bad as a spirit, this card clearly is trying to push you towards playing a mono fire style deck in order to get the advantage out of it. Dealing 500 to a target unit, that's not terrible. It's probably not going to kill something, but it could finish something off if you have attacks to pair with that damage. But 500, what kind of damage stat is on the unit you're discarding to get that 500? That seems like a very high cost for fairly low payoff. And because of the way splashing alternate colors into your deck works, you're almost locked into playing one of the fire champions in order to make this card work at all. Corona's Soul Burst power allows you to give target unit quickness. I can play a unit, I can Soul Burst my guy, and then I can attack with that unit on the same turn. That could be a big deal. That could be a game-winning interaction, and there could be decks where you would run Corona, not caring at all about his level 1 power and only focusing on the Soul Burst and being able to drop quickness onto a unit and get that burst from hand that your opponent isn't expecting. But that strikes me as a bit of an edge case, and I think a sophisticated opponent would see that kind of play coming and try to plan around it and have multiple smaller units in play, so that even if you're able to attack with your one guy, oh, well, I've got a Guardian here. There's mechanisms within the game that make this power worse if you know it's coming. And again, if you're playing this dude, you're probably almost certainly playing fire, so your opponent is prepared and ready for an early burst. And if you can't win with that early burst, you're probably not going to win that game. The last spirit currently in the game is Sola, the light spirit. This has the ability at the end of your turn, you can switch one of your exhausted units to active. That's really good. I don't think it's quite as good as being able to refresh one of your shards and get the extra tempo out of being able to play another shard worth of stuff to the board, but that's still pretty good. You can attack with a unit and then get it ready again so that it can't be attacked, and it's a way to preserve your board and continue to expand. Plus, if you're playing with things that have Guardian, the ability to attack and then have that Guardian ready at the end of your turn to defend intelligently is really valuable. This is a fairly straightforward interaction. A card like Fizzy, his value is going to be somewhat dependent on the cards that he can dig for, whereas Luna, the Dark Spirit, is going to be somewhat dependent on the cards she can force out of your opponent's hand. But Sola, while maybe not having the same peak value as either of those cards, definitely has a more consistent effect. It doesn't cost you anything to use it. You just have the ability to ready a dude at the end of turn. That's quite good. During either player's turn, you can Soul Burst Sola the Light Spirit and generate a Night token with Guardian. This is the same Guardian token that's generated by the Light Tower, so it's Night, Light, 2000, and has the Guardian ability. Being able to do that on your opponent's turn is huge. That is a big deal. Even if they plan around it, that can still be a significant disruption. I think all of these spirits are playable. If I had to rank them, I would definitely put Corona at the bottom, given how narrow his use cases are, and I don't think Luna is much past that. Now, I am a fan of making my opponent discard cards, but given how much work you have to put into getting Luna to work, compared to the other spirits, she's just not as good. Sola definitely brings some things to the table, but like I said, she has maybe lower overall power spikes than some of the other spirits, but makes up for that by being more consistent. I definitely think the first two spirits that I discussed, Kite and Fizzy, are the two best spirits in the game currently, and the card kit that the spirits bring into your deck by being able to splash those 8 cards has something to do with that as well. Now, I don't want to get into the card kit that's available for each color in this show, but suffice to say that if you look at recent top 8 finishes such as Gen Con, 5K, or the regionals, these are the spirits that are making the most appearances. I do not think I'm alone in my evaluation that Kite and Fizzy are probably the two most powerful spirits we currently have available in the game. All right, that was today's episode of Shardlight Radio. We'll see you next time, and until then, go win some games.